I'm joined now by Bryan Gould of Aspenleaf Energy. Bryan, it's good to talk to you. Just set this landscape here. How does Aspenleaf fit into the Canadian energy sector?
Great. So we are a private oil company started about 10 years ago. Myself and three colleagues, former executives at Shell, and we saw a business opportunity to acquire companies and assets in Western Canada, primarily Alberta, and produce crude oil. So we produce 25,000 barrels a day of like crude oil now. And we started the company with a vision of not just being profitable for our investors, but we grew up with a mentality and a view of how a company should be run. And so we're very passionate about our culture, commitment to working respectfully with our employees, with the communities which we operate, being responsible in terms of environmental performance. And we think they all fit together under one umbrella, which I call just strong corporate governance.
So what are the barriers for you that you're finding in the sector as an oil company that's obviously successful, but isn't one of those giant players that tends to be the one that dominates the discussion of the industry in Canada?
I'd say probably access to capital and investors. Appetite would be the wrong word. We have investors that would like to stay invested in our company. We're very profitable. And yet the societal pressures on them to divest are overwhelming and overpowering. And so we're currently going through frankly, a restructuring where some of our investors are going to be forced to divest despite rational economic performance. Just to satisfy these, what I'll call societal pressures.
I mean, it sounds like you're putting a very charitable spin on it. I mean, these are very ideologically driven in many cases. And I'm wondering why that's stronger than clearly a market-based motivation to invest and to remain investing if this is a sector that is doing as well as it is.
It's a great question. All I can tell you is I deal with managers of large, like college endowment funds. And
they've been particularly susceptible to these campaigns, these orchestrated efforts, yes.
And some of them are forced to divest. Some of them are in a situation where they're not forced to divest their current holdings, but they're not allowed or permitted to invest in new opportunities. And so I put this all under the umbrella of access to capital. And the industry is frankly being starved of this access to capital, which is the lifeblood of a capital-intensive industry.
And I think that the important point here is that for capital, Canada is not in isolation here. People can put their capital anywhere in the world. So if they're seeing an environment in this country that doesn't seem like it's worth the hassle, then they are putting that money elsewhere. They're still investing in it. It's just Canadian companies are not the beneficiaries of it, right?
Well, in part, it's Canadian companies. In part, though, I would say it's a global phenomenon. Many of our investors are based in the United States, for example, and they simply can't invest in the sector, whether it's in Canada or elsewhere. And the sad part of this for me is when I think about our investors, people think about, frankly, us old guys, we're the fat cats and all of this. But the people that are invested in my company are pensions. So I like to think of it, our profits pay pensions for retirees. We have a very large investor who has a sizable medical institute. I believe they funded something like over 20 Nobel Prize winners just in the field of medicine. We fund a major world famous art museum. So this isn't money going to, fat cats smoking big cigars. I like to think of it that the profits from our industry are paying it forward to society for education, for retirement funds, for medical research, for medical treatment, for the arts. I mean, these are all, I think, causes that we all agree are very worthwhile.
Well, and the people you employ, I mean, that's their lifeblood is this industry. And when you hear the government talk about this so-called just transition, they're really imagining and I think saying as an inevitability that there is a future in which these people shouldn't have those jobs.
So that's a great question. So, although we're fairly modest in size, when I look at our direct and indirect employment through, contractors, drilling rigs and such, we probably employ about 1,000 people. These are very high-paying jobs. We have field operators, many of whom, these are people without college educations. These are fantastic paying jobs for them. It boggles my mind to think that in this transition, that there will be any kind of replacement for that kind of employment, that quality of employment, those number of jobs. And I even hesitate to use the word just transition. That's a fallacy.
Well, it's the unjust. I mean, it's an unjust transition, which is why I've been using that language, and I will always caveat it with the so-called, and not just for Alberta. I mean, when Alberta is booming, this is attracting people from all across the country for those jobs.
100%. So this is of national interest. This isn't Calgary. This isn't Alberta. This is of national importance, and I would argue it's of importance to the Western more fully. And then I'd like to challenge two of your phrases.
Please.
Just and transition.
Well, they're not let me clarify, they're not my phrases. I'm quoting those ones, but exactly. Yes, carry on.
So in my view, there's nothing just about this. I believe in a free open market economy. And if the broader economic forces decide that there's a better product than ours to supply energy, that's great, so be it. But there's nothing just about an enforced transition. And secondly, there is no transition. So this is a complete pipe dream. The belief that the world will transition off of fossil fuels in any rational time frame is a pipe dream. The stats I heard this morning, I believe that 84% of the world's energy still comes from fossil fuels. After decades of transition, that's maybe down a couple of percent. And there are 6 to 7 billion people in this world. They're fundamentally short of energy. And the world will need all sources of energy, including fossil fuels, in my view, for the foreseeable future. And when I say foreseeable future, I mean decades and decades beyond that. So this concept that there will be a transition away from this source of energy is frankly just a fairy tale.
You've heard what they want to achieve. What would the real world implications of that be on your company? Not just your industry, but your company and your employees.
If they were to achieve what they want to achieve, our company simply would not exist. We would not exist. We would not be supplying these 1,000 jobs, the taxes we pay. We have, in our short lifespan, contributed well over $1 billion to the economy, and that would all be gone.
And that's and I don't mean this in a negative way, but that's as a smaller company.
That's as a very small company. So multiply that by many orders of magnitude, many factors when you think about the size and the breadth of the industry. So I believe we're fundamental to the Canadian economy and how it manifests itself. It's everything from who pays for the social services that we all expect and want, who pays for medical care, what happens to the value of the Canadian dollar when we don't, oil and gas is far and away our largest export. Good luck buying your fresh food and vegetables with a 30-cent dollar. So all of these things will cascade through the economy into ways that every Canadian will relate to very directly. This will cause a reduction in our standard of living, full stop. And not only that, it will compromise our national security. And these are very fundamental issues. And the reason I'm not passionate about this topic for my company, I'm passionate about these topics for our country.
Well, it's a very important note to end on. And for people who aren't in the industry, I think they can share that as well, certainly when they hear it put how you have phrased it there so eloquently. Bryan Gould, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.